My advice for employers where the injury is obvious, often witnessed, quite horrific, is to support and validate early. That usually leads to a good outcome. And in other circumstances, my advice to employers would be just to be aware that some individuals who have a past history of trauma might react with difficulties of trust, with expecting of rejection, and with feelings of hyper-arousal.
I'm joined by Brendan Jansen from MLCOA, which stands for?
The Medical Legal Company of Australia. Yeah.
And you have just come off stage at the PIEF 2024 National Conference here in beautiful Perth. And your topic today was assessing and addressing workplace trauma in the context of a worker with previous trauma, the challenges, pitfalls, and trauma-informed approaches. So explain to me now the context of a worker with previous trauma.
So a worker with previous trauma has certain buttons that can be pressed. And this is because most traumatic situations are characterized by certain, what I call dynamics, and I explained them in my talk, that make the event traumatic. And later on, these individuals are sensitized by way of what I call symbolic resonance, which I also explain in my talk. And where these recur in a later incident, it can be 1 + 1 is far greater than 2.
And what implications does obviously the implications for the person are traumatic. What are the implications for a workplace?
Well, it depends on what the injury has been, whether the injury has been a physical one or whether it's been a mental one, whether the dynamics of the workplace were in part causal of the injury. I mean, human beings are very social beings, are very sensitive to marginalization, exclusion, bullying and harassment. So it depends on those contexts. But where there's a physical injury, there are issues around trust and whether we can ensure that we're still working in a safe environment. This is with the other workers, for example. So there are multiple effects, and it depends in part on the injury.
And what's your advice for employers that could potentially be facing these sorts of occurrences?
My advice for employers where the injury is obvious, often witnessed, quite horrific, is to support and validate early. That usually leads to a good outcome. And in other circumstances, my advice to employers would be just to be aware that some individuals who have a past history of trauma might react with difficulties of trust, with expecting of rejection, and with feelings of hyper-arousal that you might get your bristles up. But just give that person a bit of a chance to explain their story.
Now, this is I would imagine there aren't a lot of team managers or managers who are equipped to manage these situations to that extent.
And it's interesting, much of the discussion at the conference has been the prevention of burnout and the psychological support for case managers themselves, because they cop a lot of this stuff. So I think education can be part of that, and it's one of the reasons that I hoped and did present this paper.
And what advice do you have for these case managers?
I think that one size doesn't fit all. So a generic approach doesn't necessarily help. Individuals with a past history of trauma benefit from being informed of the process, feeling like they have some sense of control in what is essentially a non-autonomous situation. They're provided with regular information, and there's not just the assumption that they're putting it on. I think those things would help.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your um, presentation today. It was excellent. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us in the studio.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.